Hello and welcome to the December 11th edition of the Bubb Report. I am the Bubb Report's assistant producer, Rion Charles. Last week, the NDC administration in St. George's presented its $1.3 billion estimates of revenue and expenditure to the Parliament, a slight increase from the $1.3 billion budget presented in the 2022 estimates delivered by former Finance Minister Gregory Bowen. In this budget, the administration increased the pensionable age on a phased basis from 60 to 65 in a bid to stem the potential bankruptcy of the National Insurance Scheme. They also increased the value-added tax from 15 to 20% on soft drinks and carbonated beverages, while also removing sugar from the VAT zero-rated list and expanding the list to include other personal effects. This will go into effect from February 1st, 2023. Also, the administration intends to reduce the value-added tax on electricity consumption from 15% to 7.5% for all consumers, in addition to lowering the petrol tax from $5.50 EC to $3.50 EC. Here is the Prime Minister articulating how the budget will be financed.
Government operations before financing is forecasted to result in an overall surplus of 62.7 million. An analysis of government financing below the line in 2023 will show an overfinancing of 33 million.
In his rebuttal, however, the leader of the opposition, Dr. Keith Mitchell, proffered that the budget is laced with inconsistencies and cannot be fully financed with the announced measures. He opined that what was stated in the estimates was inconsistent with what the Prime Minister delivered in his address. He also argued that the tax amnesty, which plans to waive 100% of interest and penalties for all arrears up to December 2021, is meant to support the moneyed interests of the NDC government.
It's not there, Mr. Speaker. It is important to note that the programs in the estimate by name and code are what is spent on. You can't spend otherwise. The name is important in the document. Conversely, projects stated in the budget speech, it has no meaning if the said projects are not placed in the estimate. You just can't say things to sound nice and about beautiful speech, lovely speech, and you're not there. It's not there.
There were other highlights in the budget debates, including an impassioned appeal from the Honorable Delma Thomas that transformation should not impact poor and working people who are caught in the dragnet of political partisanship when the custodial authority of the state shifts from one party to the next.
I am saying that I look forward, Mr. Speaker, to a day when government change, that ordinary people who would not affect your political work on the ground would not be sent home. And I can hear someone saying, what is happening under your watch? We're talking change. We're talking transformation, which is radical change.
Week on our program, we dissect and make sense of the 2023 estimates of revenue and expenditure to determine how it meets its targeted goals for the next fiscal year. Also on this week's episode, we discuss UNICEF's U-Report initiative. In 2011, the United Nations Children's Fund launched its flagship U-Report digital platform to engage young people in program priorities, emergency response, and advocacy actions. It supports adolescent youth and community participation and works as a tool to share information, raise awareness, and collect quantifiable data on specific areas that impact children, including the most vulnerable. We discuss how this platform is being used in Grenada and other OECS territories. We welcome our guests, Tobias Clement, Grenada's former opposition leader, Ambrose Phillip, former public administrator and political commentator, Karina Blash, Grenada's U-Report ambassador, and Oliver Joseph, Grenada's former Minister for Economic Development. Here now is our host, Dr. Kellon Bubb, with this week's editorial. We thank you for joining us.
Budget debates are an extensive articulation of the methodology of a government's fiscal agenda, detailing what they hope to accomplish in a calendar year, how they intend to achieve these policy goals, and why these policy initiatives represent the best ideals of their overall governance philosophy. However, national budgets are also mere estimates, with the caveat that the government may from time to time be required to return to the Parliament to appropriate further spending during the fiscal year. Now that the state has returned to the rules that govern its Fiscal Responsibility Act, spending will therefore be tempered significantly moving forward. Fiscal economists, therefore, need to fully understand any weakness in the country's budget execution process against this backdrop. Is it transparent? Are there clear lines of accountability? Is the information on the execution of the budget available on a timely, reliable, and accurate basis? Is it thus consistent with the principles of good government? The newly minted Prime Minister of Grenada, the Honorable Deacon Mitchell, and his team attempted to not only prosecute the case for why this budget is consistent with their long-term governance philosophy, but also suggested that they will be able to truly create the enabling environment for lifting Grenadians out of poverty. The opposition, for their part, attempted to poke holes in this approach, suggesting that the administration is anti-poor and callous by virtue of their tax increases on some consumable items such as sugar. They were, however, also measured and gave credit to the administration for staying true to some of the principles that underpin continuity in governance. Comedic sideshows, such as the appearance of an NNP operative on GBN's Beyond the Headlines program, as well as a hissy fit thrown by the opposition leader, complaining of the non-availability of a hard copy of the estimates of revenue and expenditure, have become par for the course of budget debate cycles. Now, former opposition leader Tobias Clement would have much to say about the rich irony of the current opposition leader complaining about the lack of the timely arrival of the budget documents in time for the budget debate. Despite these sideshows, however, we believe that the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Northwest, the Honourable Delma Thomas, captured the spirit and tenor of this year's annual debate ritual. In fact, her measured, stoic, and reflexive presentation emphatically championed the cause of poor and working people, while also giving credit to the administration for some of the measures they proposed in the estimates. Her contribution to the debate embodied the true spirit of a patriot that is not blinded by rigid partisan loyalty, but undergirded by a deep sense of cognitive flexibility. Thomas demonstrated the cognitive flexibility to admit her administration's role in fostering an environment of hyper-partisan divide in Grenada, while also acknowledging that elections, in fact, have consequences. The St. Andrew Northwest MP was right to call for a more neutral approach in treating citizens compassionately, whose economic livelihoods are upended in the aftermath of national elections. The complex and serious nature of the challenges of our time means that no single political party or no single politician can deal with them on their own. People's lives are better when the government is efficient and responsive, when people from all social groups are included in decision making that affects their lives and have equal access to fair institutions that provide services and administer justice. They will have more trust in their government. Therefore, we should all be rooting for the success of this and any other administration elected to serve at the pleasure of the electorate. Viewers and listeners, good morning again, and welcome to the penultimate episode of the Bubb Report for 2022. It was my pleasure, as well as the pleasure of my co-host, my very competent co-host, Kitaka Mawuto, for being in the hosting chair this year. Next week will be our final episode. We will then take a 2-week break for the holiday period. But at this time, I wish to welcome our first guest for this week's episode of the Bubb Report. She's a young lady in Grenada, Karina Blash. She's Grenada's OECS U-Report ambassador, or Grenada's ambassador of the OECS U-Report project. So Karina, I hope I got that correct, but thank you for being our spotlight guest this week. How are you today?
Hi, good morning. I'm fine, thank you.
It's such a pleasure. Are you still a student of the TAMCC?
No, I'm not.
Okay,
I'm
because
currently a student of the University of London.
Oh, you're at the University of London. Okay, very well. Well, welcome to the program and all the very best on your studies. So let us talk about the OECS U-Report project. How is this different from other social media platforms? It is a platform-based type of service, or shouldn't say service, but it performs a very important role. So tell us how that platform is different from other platforms.
Okay, so firstly, we need to understand what the platform is. And essentially,
Yes.
U-Report OECS is a free social messaging platform developed by UNICEF in 2011. And its main function is to engage young persons in various polls or surveys so that they have an opportunity to voice their concerns about issues affecting them, or to voice their opinion on topics that matter to them. So essentially, this platform is not merely just to network and connect with other persons. The ultimate goal is to gather young persons' views on issues that affect them, in the hopes that the relevant authorities, be it organizations or government ministries, would have first-hand information as to what issues are affecting young persons, how can they remedy it, and they can use the data collected via this platform to impact or influence their policies. So it's different in the fact that its main aim is a data collection tool.
It's a data collection tool. Why did you decide to get involved in this project?
Well, firstly, I saw the potential in this platform. I think it has it is of great social value, and it aligns with some of my core values as an individual. I was actually informed of the group and invited to join after participating in a debate on the state of education across the region. And following that debate, I found that there was a lot of things or a lot of views that I had as an individual to share with others, especially to those in authority. And so I became a part of this group so that I can be able to have an avenue whereby I can voice my concern and encourage others to do the same.
So let us talk about some of those issues that inform discussion on the platform, that inform that data collection that your generation are concerned about.
Okay, so some of the polls that we would have had recently, well, from the time the platform was set up in 2021 to now, include students what's it? The challenges of students during the COVID-19 pandemic. We would have also had a poll leading up to the general elections in Grenada earlier this year. It was youth participation in politics and governance. Currently, there is a similar poll going on in the Commonwealth of Dominica ahead of their general elections. We would have released polls on health and wellness, climate change, child protection. There was a poll specific to Dominica on their social protection policy. Um, there was another poll in partnership with UNICEF on child marriage and early unions, as well as a poll on digital transformation in Grenada, St. Lucia, Dominica, and St. Vincent. So these are some of the topics that the platform have covered so far. Um, and going forward, we hope to tackle other issues such as mental health, crime and violence, sex education, and so forth.
Now, what do you do with that data? Because as a researcher, I love data collection because that is what informs analysis. But what do you do with that data? You collect the data, you have the information from young people. What happens? Do you then present that to policymakers? Does UNICEF have a particular mandate to use that data as part of a developmental tool? What happens when you collect it?
Okay, so firstly, the data collected is displayed publicly on our website to promote accountability and transparency. So
Mhm.
the public can go onto the platform to see the results of the poll. The information can also be disaggregated based on gender, based on age, based on your locality, and so forth. However, the
Mhm.
primary aim is to compile and analyze that data and present it to the most relevant stakeholders. So,
Mhm.
be it organizations who would have perhaps requested a particular poll, or just various government ministries who we think the information would be most useful to. The data is presented to them so that they can use it to impact their policies. One of our success stories would be that instant in St. Vincent during the eruption of the La Soufre volcano. A poll was done to ascertain the needs of persons um, in the immediate aftermath of the volcano. And the government was able to use the information from the platform to reach out to persons who were in need of water, food supplies, transportation, and so forth.
Very well. And of course, what are some other issues? Of course, you work in that youth space. The future is yours to embrace, and the future is yours to manage. Um, how would you say people in your generation have been responding to this U-Report project, at least in the context of Grenada?
Right. So at first, persons were a bit hesitant,
Mhm.
because the platform was launched during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there was limited opportunity for face-to-face interaction, face-to-face outreach. So most of our outreach was done via social media. And
Mhm.
of course, we know a lot of the dangers of, signing up to stuff online. So in my in my experience, when I would send the link to friends and explaining to them what it's about, they're like, this sounds like you've been hacked, you know? But as things have been coming back to normal and we have more opportunity to go out, go on the media, to speak more about it, visit schools, have face-to-face interactions, I think that persons are coming along. They're warming up to the idea. I must say that the Grenadians, they warmed up to the idea pretty quickly because we have been leading in the number of signups for some time. Just recently, in the past 2 weeks, Antigua and Barbuda would have gained more signups than we had.
Mhm.
So I think Grenadian participation has been really great over the past few months, and I would like to commend my Grenadian supporters for that. Um, we currently have the second highest number of signups. Let me
Mhm.
get the figure for you. We have, I think it's 1,012 U-Reporters from Grenada out of 5,117. Also, there was we also had the highest level of participation in that poll on youth participation in politics and governance, just ahead of our general elections. And so I look forward to Grenada's continued participation and engagement with the platform.
Talk to us about that youth participation and governance data set. What were young people saying?
So most young persons were saying that outside of the election cycle, they had very limited opportunity to be a part or be involved in the politics and governance of their country. Young persons were saying ahead of the elections, many of them were a bit unaware as to why exactly they were going to vote, right? Some of the reasons that they stated they would have voted in the past is because of family influence, friend affiliations, and so forth. However, for the upcoming elections, many of them, a significant portion of them, would have stated that this time around they were voting for change. And so,
When you say the upcoming, you mean the previously concluded election in
yes,
June?
the
Yes.
previously concluded elections, right? And so, if the contesting parties would have utilized that information, they could have had an idea as to what direction a lot of young persons were leaning towards, and perhaps that could have impacted or influenced or caused them to change their campaigning tactics or so.
That's interesting to hear you say that. That perhaps we should rely on our own indigenous polling uh, to make sense
Yes.
of what people are saying. This is not a slight on any pollster, but I'm just saying indigenous methods of research are also important. Any final words from you before we get to the next segment?
Well, I would just like to briefly explain how it is how you can join U-Report. I would
Yes.
briefly explain the sign up process. So firstly, you need to sign up to the platform, and this can be done via one of our three social messaging platforms. So we're available on WhatsApp, Instagram, and Facebook Messenger. So you text the word join, JOIN, to our WhatsApp number, which is 1758 287 2124, and the chatbot would prompt you to answer three, or should I say four, simple questions, right? So they would ask you your age, your gender, and your locality, inclusive of your country and your parish. And it is important to note that this information is only to understand the demographic of the respondents, right? You will not be asked to include your name. Your personal data would not be stored. Yes. So once you answer those questions, whenever a poll becomes available, the chatbot would notify you, hey, there's a poll available. Would you like to participate? You can then select yes or no. The chat is really easy to maneuver. It is quick, simple. Most of the questions are multiple choice. You can complete it within 2 to 5 minutes, and the results are displayed publicly on our website. And like I mentioned before, the results are also compiled and presented to the relevant stakeholders. And this is how you can be a part of U-Report and make your contribution to policy development.
All right, Karina, thank you so much. And what is your major? What are you studying?
I am currently pursuing my bachelor's of law.
Oh, you're doing law. Okay, very well. All right. What specialization in law do you hope to pursue?
I
Or
am not
you've not
sure as yet. I'm
decided yet?
keeping my options open for the time.
That is a very good approach. I always say that to my students. Always keep your options open, especially for students who come in with undeclared majors. Yes, it's always good to keep those options open. Absolutely. Okay, Karina Blash, thank you again so much. You are Grenada's ambassador
Having me?
for the OECS U-Report project, a UNICEF-sponsored data collection platform that really seeks to collect data from young people on the issues that are affecting them in the OECS subregion, inclusive of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. So, Ms. Blanche, thank you so much. Okay, our viewers and listeners, please stand by. We will be right back with the second segment of this week's episode of the Bubb Report. Stand by. The next segment of the Bubb Report comes to you compliments S.A. Johnson Funeral Home. They are a Caribbean family-owned funeral service. They offer a full range of funeral services at affordable prices in New York City. They can be reached on 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity.
Mr. Speaker, these first 5 months have been as challenging as they have been rewarding. We were able to verify what many Grenadians knew to be true, that our difficult circumstances and lack of progress over the past decade had more to do with mismanagement and gross neglect of the previous administration than it did with external factors. The willful damage inflicted on our society, and especially our youth, and the most vulnerable amongst us, is still a reality that gives us pause, Mr. Speaker. We are confident, however, that by starting smart and developing the foundational capacities of our people and institutions, we will overcome this dark period in our history and rise to the forefront of regional advancement once more. It is for this reason, Mr. Speaker, the priorities set out in the 2023 budget are people-centered and intended to lay a solid foundation for our transformation agenda by building resilience, empowerment, and growth. Resilience, Mr. Speaker, as we seek to prepare our people to bounce back and bounce forward from the many challenges that we face as a small island developing state, vulnerable to the effects of climate change and other global shocks. Empowerment, as we break free from a system designed to keep many of our people in poverty and dependent on the state. Growth, as we collectively move forward, armed with the right skills to take advantage of the opportunities that are unique to our island reality and on high demand internationally. Mr. Speaker, we are just getting started and look forward to a whole of country participation as we seek to rebuild, retool, and prepare our citizens for the future. Every citizen can play their part, whether at home or in the diaspora, to bring our shared transformative agenda to fruition. Mr. Speaker, I close with the hopeful words of the Almighty, as it is written in James chapter 1, verses 2 and 4. And I quote, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." Mr. Speaker, this administration answered the call to serve despite challenges that seem insurmountable to many. Our successful perseverance is the result of a collective effort, and we are indeed thankful to every individual who believed in our vision and subscribed to the aspiration for a better future for all.
And welcome back, viewers and listeners. At this point, we are going to segue in our conversation on the 2023 Grenada Budget that was delivered by the newly minted Prime Minister of Grenada, the Honorable Deacon Mitchell. And let us welcome our panelists. We do have Mr. Tobias Clement, who is Grenada's former leader of the People's Opposition. I would not proceed with calling you Her Majesty's Opposition because I believe you represented the people, but that is my view. It is an anti-colonial perspective I take, and I make no apologies for that. Also, Mr. Ambrose Phillip. Mr. Ambrose Phillip, who is an economist, public administrator, who speaks on matters of national importance. In fact, Mr. Phillip, I should let the public know that you, in fact, reached out to the Bubb Report, and we are very happy that you did, because we do value your contribution on the program. We also have the former Minister for Foreign Affairs of Grenada, who was also the former candidate for the constituency of St. David. That's Mr. Oliver Joseph. We are still trying to work out issues with his camera here, but once that issue has been resolved, we are going to have him on screen. But Mr. Clement, I want to begin with you as the former leader of the opposition. Now, having listened to your predecessor, that's I should say your successor, not your predecessor, your successor as the leader of the opposition, how would you rate his response to the budget debate? Did you feel as if your successor did justice to the budget by actually debating the substantive issues that were in the budget?
Thank you very much, Dr. Bob. And let me just do my courtesies to say good morning to all of your viewers and listeners in Grenada, in the diaspora, and to the other panelists. A pleasant good morning. Thank you for having me on. Yes. I do believe that, I can always go back to statements that I have made in the past about budgets, and I continue to do so even today. With that in mind, I always say that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Mm-hmm. And I have listened to the presentation of the budget by the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, and I have also listened to the rebuttal. And in some cases, I went back to the recording and listened again. And I did also was privy to a copy of some of the documents that came from the budget debate. And generally speaking, I do believe that the Prime Minister presented well. And in so doing, I think he put forward a case to the Grenadian people. But that case must be proven, and it will be proven in 2023. The leader of Her Majesty's opposition also did what he had to do in terms of opening up the budget and looking at the budget in terms of where it can take us or where it is heading. After all, a man or anybody can come up with the best budget statement in the world. Mm-hmm. But the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and what would be impacting on the nation, as in the estimate of revenue and expenditure for 2023, is the delivery, and when that is done, you can go back at the end of December and analyze what was done and what was not done. And in a lot of cases over the years, I have seen where many budgets have fallen short of plans and programs that were placed in them, and some of them were not even spoken about. I mean, not even in the analysis of the past years. So the verdict is still out on it, and it is a budget that should be debated throughout the year 2023.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Let me bring in Mr. Phillip, Mr. Ambrose Phillip. Welcome back to the report. Again, same question. In terms of the quality of the budget, we will get to some of the pillars that the budget articulated. But in relation to the tone and tenor of the debate of the 2023 budget, how do you stack it up against other budgets you've listened to in the past?
All right. Well, first of all, Calvin, thank you, and good morning to all the viewers and listeners. at home and in the diaspora and wherever else they may be. First and foremost, I think we need to separate the chaff from the grain. And let me begin by asking, first and foremost, what is the purpose of a budget? The purpose of a budget is not simply to address some of the necessities of the state, but the principal purpose of a budget is in fact to elaborate on the policies of the sitting administration. So you will see, first and foremost, a high degree of congruence between the NDC manifesto that was published in June or July and the content of the budget. In fact, there are some parts of the budget presentation that is a reflection, is taken verbatim from pages of the manifesto of the National Democratic Congress, which was published in June. Having said that, the budget, like previous budgets, are framed within a particular set of constraints. What are those constraints? Those constraints are, one, the issue of the National Sustainable Development Plan to 2035. It is framed by the medium-term debt strategy. It is framed by the constraints of raising funds and stuff like that. So if we look at it in that context, it is not a bad budget. It is not an exceptional budget. It may be regarded as a good budget.
But you talk about constraints, Mr. Philip. I'm sorry, not wanting to cut your train of thought. But another constraint is the return to the rules under the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Yes, would you also identify that as a constraint that perhaps can temper some of the excesses? I wouldn't say excesses, but some of the enthusiasm that can inform implementation of some of the projects that the government has afoot.
That is absolutely correct, because on the second or third page of the budget presentation, the Prime Minister did in fact outline some of the documents which were background to the budget. And the Fiscal Responsibility Act is one of those constraints. However, when we look at the information that were listed on the first couple of pages of that budget presentation, we will see that the reports are all over a year old. So the report of the last FROC, I believe it must have been very early. It was in April of this year. It dealt with the period ending last year. If you look at the debt sustainability framework, again, that is a year old. So we don't know exactly what is the current situation with respect to the past 12 months. In other words, we are dealing with a 2023 budget with 2021 information. We do not have full forecast or even proper forecast with respect to 2022 information. There are some things we've heard. We've heard of the IMF or the World Bank projections that we will achieve probably 5.5% growth to the end of the year. But we don't have actuals in this regard. So yes, the fiscal responsibility legislation, and by the way, I think it has also been pointed out that the leeway which had been afforded the previous administration because of the COVID situation in respect of 2020 and 2021 budgets, that leeway is closed, and the return to the fiscal prudence that the fiscal responsibility legislation calls for is supposed to return next year. So, for example, the reports would indicate that, say, take for example the debt to GDP ratio, that in fact had been coming down.
And it has to be under a particular threshold. I believe it's 60%, 66%, I believe.
I don't know about threshold, because once upon a time the threshold as set by the central bank, well, by the central bank, I believe, was 60%, but the target from the fiscal responsibility report appears to be 55%. In respect of 2022, I believe the target was 69%. And I believe somewhere in the documentation, there's a suggestion that 69% could fall to 67% in 2023. So it is on the downward trend, and the leeway which previously existed is no longer there. And that is one of the constraints in the budget.
Absolutely. And now I believe we can actually welcome Mr. Joseph. Let's see if we can get you on screen here. If we can adjust your camera, Mr. Joseph, we put you to work this morning, sir, technology-wise. So
yes.
I believe I might owe you a oil when I come to Grenada. So thank you, Mr. Joseph. Good morning, sir. Good morning and welcome to the report. Of course, now you are on the
morning to all your listeners.
Absolutely. Now you are on the other side of the ledger, Mr. Joseph. You, of course, were former Minister of Foreign Affairs, International Trade, but you also were a permanent secretary in government. So you have an intimate understanding of, I believe we having, so let me disconnect, let me remove this. All right, let's see. All right, you should be better now. Just unmute, sir. You should be better now.
All
yeah,
right.
Much better.
Okay.
Yeah. You were also a permanent secretary. So obviously you have an intimate understanding of the budgetary process, both from a policy angle and from a governmental angle, serving the previous administration. Again, the same question that I posed to the two the two panelists here concerning the quality of this year's budget. How would you assess that compared to what your administration proffered in the past?
All right, thank you. First of all, we need to focus on the budget. The budget statement, or what we call the budget speech, is a political statement by the political party, the government at the time. The parliament is not expected to approve a budget speech. The parliament approves the estimates of revenue and expenditure. And therefore, a lot of what you hear in the budget speech are political statements that you hear there. And that is why the response by the leader of the opposition will also be political, because he needs to respond to the political statements that were made. I think I want to focus more on the budget itself. In terms
the estimates of revenue and expenditure.
That is what I want to, that is what I want to spend my time doing, not commenting on the political statements that were made. First of all, the budget since 2014. So you will recall in 2013, we undertook a structural adjustment program. So from 2014, a budget framework was agreed to and legislated. So you had the Fiscal Responsibility Act that sets targets. You have the Public Finance Management Act. You have the Procurement Act. And there are a number of other documents that must be submitted to Parliament, like the medium-term review and the risk management statement. All the statements now from 2014 must be submitted to Parliament to accompany the estimates of revenue and expenditure. So there are constraints when you're preparing the budget in order to be compliant with the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And as you know, the targets there are set by Parliament. So, for example, in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, the wage bill must not exceed 9% of GDP. Primary expenditure should not exceed 2% in the previous year. The debt to GDP ratio, it was targeted at 55%. The ECCB sets a benchmark at 60%. It did not say when we're going to achieve the 55%, but that is a target that we are working towards. So all these constraints you have. So this government is no different. They must prepare a budget to satisfy all these requirements. And that is what the focus has to be, satisfying these requirements. And therefore, This budget is only $300,000 more than the previous budget, you know. That's all. So in terms of the estimate and revenue, what you have to look at, though, the difference would be how you allocate, because your budget constraint is 1.35 billion. That is what you have to spend for 1 year. And is the allocation of these limited resources that will determine the outcome that you get. And the policies that you announce, the population will evaluate the policies and the tax measures that you announce. And I will come into that later when I look at go into details of the estimated revenue and expenditure.
Yeah.
In the earlier days, they used to talk about if we are a left-wing government or a right-wing based on your policies. These terms are not so much used now. But in our context, we say whether you're for the working class, whether it's a working class government you have based on the policies you announce. So I just outlined all the constraints, which the budgets are now prepared under, and I will go into some numbers to show whether or not the tax measures as announced
and we would certainly, we absolutely get into that, Mr. Joseph, because I believe that's where
you're breaking up.
Okay, I believe that. Am I breaking up, folks? Are you able to see
me still
and hear me? Okay.
You are clear on my side.
Okay, so Mr.
Same
Joseph,
here, loud and clear.
Yeah. So Mr. Joseph, let's see. There might be an issue there.
I'm not hearing you clearly.
Okay, let me see if I can. You might have to log off and log back on again if that is the case.
I think the thing is, I was hearing you much better on my laptop, but the only thing you was not seeing me.
Right. Yeah. But now you're saying you can't hear me clearly. You might have to get some headphones. So we are going to adjust that there. My producer will be working with you on that.
I'm not hearing you at all.
Yeah. So let us. You heard Mr. Joseph's statement there concerning the what is projected versus what the actual reality is in the context of the actual estimates. I want to get your thoughts, Mr. Clement, on what Mr. Joseph just articulated there.
Well, he has been involved in budget preparation and presentation for the last 10 years, and even before that as working within the ministry as a PS. So it is true that in the whole context of the formulation of budget, as Mr. Joseph rightly said and Mr. Ambrose rightly said, governments are constrained, and these constraints, you have to look at them in the context of your financing of the budget. And like he rightly said, and is something that one has, what will be passed in Parliament is those numbers that are in the document that is presented, the estimate of revenue and expenditure for 2023. And to operate in the framework of the constraints that you have, again, I think there will be a couple of things that you have to look at. The allocation of the funds, your income and expenditure, because again, as Mr. Ambrose rightly say, and Mr. Joseph would tell you, it's a projection. And for it to work, both your income and expenditure must be on the level within that certain framework. And when this is done, probably you would have met the requirements of the restraints that you're operating in. And these disciplinary measures were not just done ad hocly. You know, it was done with the Caribbean Development Bank, the ECCB, the World Bank, and all the entities that were interested in bringing Grenada back to sustainability. And if that can be done in next year's budget, or the budget for 2023, well, then I say all kudos. And like I said again, the implementation of that document would speak. And like Mr. Ambrose alluded to, that we do not yet have the figures for 2023, which probably will show up when all the auditing is done early next year.
Absolutely. So
again,
let us get into the question of the allocation, the issues that really animated and informed the debate in the Parliament with respect to some of those policy prescriptions. The tax on sugar and confectionery items was a concern, and of course that tax is of course a revenue generating measure, but the administration proffers that it is also meant to curb some of the excesses, some of the our enthusiasm for consumption of sugar, so that we can then become a more healthy population. Your thoughts on that particular revenue earning measure, Mr. Philip? I'll start with you, because the
Well, first of
opposition's view is
all,
that revenue earning measure is anti-poor. Go ahead.
first of all, I don't know why there is the hue and cry about this sugar tax, so to speak.
Yeah.
Had it been I may have distinguished between brown sugar and white sugar. And in any event, I do believe that white sugar generally is a little more expensive. But I am mindful of the fact of an individual who said, listen, man, to get my children to drink lime juice, I had to sweeten it. And I believe that maybe there could have been a distinction between brown sugar and white sugar. Mm-hmm. But I'm not looking at that. That, in fact, is quite minor. I believe that there are more significant elements. I think overall, there appears to be a gap. Mm-hmm. Sir Joseph or somebody said something about $300,000.
$300,000 more than the previous allocation.
It is 300 million. It is a 300 million difference. It was a 1.1 billion budget before. It has gone up. It has gone up to by $300 million. When you look, my concern is what I will call the financing gap. When you look at the increases that the government has announced in a number of areas, and I have a list of them. For example, in the terms of the allocation for various ministries, programs, you have the health and wellness increasing by 17 million, the question of education increasing by 11.4 million, the question of agriculture and fisheries increasing by $14 million, the creation of the creative economy, from moving from $0 to $3.4 million, infrastructure, physical development, and so on, an increase of $9 million. Overall, you're talking about at least a $55 million increase on allocations in those areas that did not exist before. In addition to which, if you go through the budget, you will see that the government is boasting of concessions or reductions that are in excess of $30 million. If you go to page 62 of the budget, you will see the Prime Minister has stated there that the concessions foregone amount to $30 million. So effectively, you have to add 30 to the 55 million increases of before. You're coming up with a minimum of $85 million more that has to be found from somewhere. It is not clear to me where that is going to be coming from, because the budget also says that while we are expecting $80 million, $81 million, in fact, from the World Bank, that the budget would not be financed by increases from domestic sources. And that, in my view, raises the question of the Transformation Fund, where, in fact, there is almost no information given to the citizenry as regards the composition, the amounts, and the use of the Transformation Fund. The only useful thing that we've been told about the Transformation Fund is that I think it is the central bank, page 47 of the budget, NTF funds, where the decision has been, or a policy position has been, that 10% of transformation funds will be earmarked for post-disaster financing. That to me is the makings of a sovereign fund, something that I have personally advocated about 4 or 5 years now. But concrete thing is that we do not have information on the transformation fund. For example,
and when you say transformation fund, yeah, I want us to be clear to the audience.
1 minute. My good friend Oliver and company picked up nearly $200 million of that transformation fund to pay for Grenada a year ago. Nobody knew, apart from, of course, the cabinet at the time, knew how much money had been in that fund. It has never been a matter of public disclosure. And we see that this government seems to be relying significantly on the transformation fund. And we, the citizenry, don't have a clue as to what is there and how it got there.
Let me see, Mr. Joseph, are you able to hear us now? Our producer, we are still trying to get through to Mr. Joseph, but now we can't seem to get through to him.
Well, no, I'm hearing you very clear.
Oh, but we can't. Are you able to turn the camera on, sir?
No, only on my telephone I could turn the camera on, but the reception there is not very good, so I'll stick to my laptop. I'm hearing you very clear.
Okay, please,
on the laptop, but you will hear me.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
All right. Yes. Let me start out where Mr. Ambrose Philip left up from. Now, the National Transformation Fund is under the Citizenship by Investment Program. It is a Section 10. Section 10 of the CBI states that you can make a contribution to a National Transformation Fund of 200,000 US and qualify to be citizen of Grenada. So it is that fund we're talking about, right? The National Transformation Fund.
And that's what I wanted to mention here. That those are proceeds from sales of citizenship by investment passports.
Well, we don't say that way. We say investment migration.
Well, it's semantics, Mr. Joseph. It's investment migration, whatever you call it. You're selling passports. Let us be not politically correct, but please proceed.
The point, Mr. Joseph, and the point, Mr. Bubb, is that the public has never been given an account of those funds. We have never heard that in period A to period B, that the fund has attracted X million dollars or whatever it is. We have never heard that. Up to this point in time, we've never heard
that is not correct.
Mr. Joseph, go ahead.
No. The amount is always stated. The amount of money that is raised, and the present government said that. They said they have the figures with the amount that was collected under CBI from the NTF and from fees. They have it. That is why they could use that as a basis for making the projection. They said that clearly. So that is not correct. What I want to say about the National Transformation Fund, though, as a major source of revenue, is high risk in light of pending legislation. And that's something I want to make very clear. In light of pending legislation in the European Union and in the US already, the European Commission took a decision that by 2025, any member state of the European Union that have citizenship by investment program, because they have it, they want to make you believe they don't have it. They have. Malta have, Cyprus have, they have. Any member state of the European Union that have a citizenship must get rid of it by 2025. And for the members who have it, unless they make radical changes to it, they will lose the visa-free access. So to go to Europe now, you're the Schengen visa.
The Schengen agreement, under the Schengen agreement.
Right. Yes. That would not be extended to member states who continue with the citizenship by investment program in its present context. So they won't tell you have to get rid of that program, but they will say to you, if they are not satisfied, that you do not have access, visa-free access. Now, that is the attraction. That is the attraction there. You want a passport that you could travel visa-free in as many countries as possible. And so if you applying for a passport that would not give you visa-free access to Europe, then it has no attraction. It will turn to other places. And therefore, your revenue is under direct threat And that is why, in the face of these two announcements by the US about the EB2 visa and the EU, that this government is relying so heavily on the National Transformation Fund for budget implementation. That is a real high risk. You see, if there was no announcement, maybe you could understand and say, well, they could project based on the last amount that was collected, they can make a projection. It's like you're getting one in for hurricane and you take no precaution, you know. So that is a real threat to budget. And if you don't get the money, then the budget implementation is under a real threat.
So, Minister Joseph, in hindsight, you are admitting that the CBI program is not necessarily a sustainable program in the way that it was initially convinced by your administration.
Yes, that is because you remember, Mr. Philip, go remember that. You remember what they did with the offshore service sector in the Caribbean? As soon as we start to make money, they blacklist all of us. Until
That's right.
Yes,
Grenada was on that blacklist. Yeah.
Yes, so I'm saying yes. I am saying that, and I'm saying, in light of the pending legislation, we should not rely heavily on receipts from CBI program as this government is projecting to collect, because they would not collect it, and therefore, when you do not collect it, then you cannot implement your budget to achieve the outcomes that is desired. So
let us get Mr. Clement. Let me bring in a former leader of the opposition, Mr. Clement, here on again financing the budget by way of revenues and proceeds from that National Transformation Fund. Mr. Clement, where do you come down on this approach?
Well, I have when it was first implemented by the former NNP administration, which I was part of, I've always wondered about where we're going with the Citizen by Investment program. And probably it have now almost run its course in terms of where because as the minister rightly said, I think it will sunset just now because it may not be of any value for you to come to invest in Grenada to get a passport, and thus you cannot use it as you see fit because you will not have access as you would want to. But let me go back in terms of the shortfall between revenue and expenditure. And I listen to the budget, I look at some of the documents, and one of my concern that I have though is in terms of financing of these projects or the different aspects of the budget. And something that I was taken aback by, we have forgone so many tax revenue in terms of fuel, in terms of sugar, in terms of some other stuff. But one of the ones that I wanted to get answers to that one is that we're having a tax amnesty. So if I am operating a business, I might be wrong, and I collected VAT on behalf of the government, and I did not give the government that monies that is belonging to the government. Now I will get a break from that. I mean, our citizenry of Grenada would have paid that monies to the different institutions with the hope that the government would have collected. And we know that there are a lot of times when institutions would fall short on the payment of the monies that they collected on behalf of government. And now government will not be collecting that money. Maybe somebody could help me understand, is it a legal thing that government could just give an institution amnesty on monies, not that they owe to government per se, but monies that they have collected on behalf of government from the people of Grenada, and they refuse to do it, or they could not, or they spend it otherwise, and that should have been part of the tax base for future use in the 2023 budget.
To finance the 2023 budget. Yes, Mr. Philip, let's get your thoughts on that. Yes.
Let's separate the question of amnesty from the issue of withholding of amounts that should go to government. The question of withholding monies collected on behalf of the government applies principally in respect of VAT, the VAT legislation.
Right.
But the question of the 600 million, I believe, is what the budget indicated, the 600 million that is owed by way of taxes and stuff like that, whether it is property tax or other forms of taxation, is a different matter. And I do believe, Mr. Clement and Mr. Joseph, that your governments in the past have afforded amnesty to people to come in. And I think that the approach to amnesty has to be the case of a bird in hand is worth 200 in the bush. If you have 600 million out there and you can't collect it, and by offering an amnesty, you can get 10% of that, you get $60 million you wouldn't otherwise have had. Why?
But why? But the question is,
simply because our governments in the past have not been prepared to do what they ought to have done. When people owe you, you can seize their property and sell it. Governments have not been prepared to do that, and therefore the question of amnesty will always come up.
So that was the question. It's about the enforcement of those penalties.
Precisely, they don't want to enforce it through the court, but it can be done. Right? Yeah. Once you seize one person's property, you'll be surprised how many of them come and pay up. But no, it probably is to me, it's a soft approach, and I would love to see the measure of success
with that. Yeah, of course. And it's also a short-term approach. We have to know that it's tempered by a particular time period.
Let's just take
but I'm going to get Mr. Joseph as well to comment on that too. But go ahead.
I think the question of raising revenue is an issue in this budget. So much is foregone, so much concessions are given, and I tell you, I am still, apart from the vague reference to the transformation fund, I am not seeing actual numbers in that regard. Let us take the matter of property tax, for example. There's a reference there to revising rates. Right? There is not a bold step. There is not a bold step in saying that, listen, we will review the property rates by March, by June, by September, that we are raising X million dollars from it now, and that we hope to be able to raise X plus Y million dollars for it. We don't have that kind of a definite statement coming out in the budget, but I still hold the view that in respect of properties, this remains one of the big areas in which there can be a tremendous increase in the revenue. What people are paying for property tax, and in fact, I have made this point in a public consultation, what people are paying for property tax is a fraction of what people's properties are insured for. So maybe what we should do, in fact, is to link property taxation to the insured values. And I'm not talking about chattel house, and I ain't talking about somebody who have a boat house on some telephone post. I'm not talking about stuff like that. That is probably in any event is zero rated, because I believe the property tax thing starts after the first 50,000 or whatever it is. But we are taking a soft approach on this matter of properties. And I believe it should be a second, if not first, large area of income apart from corporation taxes and stuff like that, given that personal income tax is almost negligible.
Mr. Joseph, let us unpack that idea. The notion that there might be significant constraints on revenue collection as a result of these measures, such as the tax amnesty measure that's in the budget as well. Let's get your thoughts on that. Do you believe that can also temper government's ability to collect the revenue to finance that budget? Notwithstanding that the government did say that there was a financing surplus that would inform what the execution of the budget would look like in 2023. Your thoughts?
All right. First of all, let us look at the question of the amnesty. So the $600 million just in a business, bad debt written off. You have that in businesses, right?
Yeah.
The government is convinced that in no way they could collect the 600 million. No, they don't, and decide to start clean. However, they would not, if you give in 100% waiver, then you would not collect any money and the arrears. Now, what could have been separated is the tax type. So you say, and to address Mr. Clement's concern, which is a genuine one, For VAT, you do not give any amnesty because the money is not yours. That's consumer shopping and paying you VAT, and you are just the custodian of it to hand it into government, so there should be no amnesty there. You give amnesty and the other taxes, but not on VAT. A distinction should have been made with respect to value-added tax because of the very nature of it and the way it is paid in. So that's the first thing. The second one, on the property, just to let Mr. Philip know that it is not the tax rate that the government said they will increase. They said they will do a revaluation of properties. And if you do a revaluation of properties, it's a separate thing from increasing the tax. You may decide, well, we have updated values now, so the rate is not applicable. Or given the value, now we may increase the rate. But I read that twice, that particular statement. And what they are undertaking is the valuation of properties. That is what they're undertaking. And maybe they may wish to consider your idea of putting it to the insured value. That is an idea they may wish to consider, but it's valuation and not
Agreed.
Right. Okay. Then, so as I said, that is it on the amnesty. Every government will do that. As I say, just like how businesses have bad debt written off. It's the same concept. You have no chance of collecting it. And as he said, we maybe, when you live in small societies like that, you're off to just go and close down my property and seize everything for the tax, you know.
Well, Dorset Charles would have a lot to say about that, Mr. Joseph. Yes.
Well, I suppose so.
But I would temper my. Please proceed.
No, in small societies like this, it's very difficult. Then,
yes.
So that's my take on the value of the property and the disposal of the asset. Now, there is one thing called, the government says they're going to raise money to support budget implementation through the disposal of assets. I have not seen a list of the assets you want to dispose of. Because I know at one time NDC government was selling out all the assets to pay salaries. The real big valuable assets that we have now is Grenlec. But except the government intend to sell Grenlec, I don't know where this revenue will come from the disposal of assets. Maybe, I don't know if anyone member of the panel know the Lisa assets or the assets that will be sold, but it is there as one means of raising the revenue to finance the budget disposal of assets. If you say that, you must come clean. You must say the assets, because we're talking about a budget period of 1 year, you know. The budget is for 1 year. It's not like going for this year. You're going to raise the revenue by disposing assets. So I look forward for a list of the assets and the announcements of which assets that will be sold to raise the revenue to finance the budget.
Well, Kelon, in that regard, on page 40 of the budget presentation, there's a declaration there, or a policy statement, that the new administration is going to compile a register of government assets. And I would welcome that, because the truth of the matter is we don't properly account for public assets of the state. In fact, if I were to take that approach, there are one or two bold things about this budget that we should not, apart from the question of continuity in the context of the fiscal framework, the debt servicing requirements, and so on. There are one or two bold aspects of this budget that I believe are worthy of comment.
Well, we are going, Mr. Philip, we are going to get to that. That's on the second part of the program. So I want you to temper the enthusiasm that we are going to get to those 6 pillars as the Prime Minister articulated. But Mr. Clement, I want to give you an opportunity to say
yes. I mean, that was what Mr. Joseph mentioned. I look at it in the budget document, and I listened to it also, and I know between 2008 to 2013, quite a number of government assets were liquidated, were sold. I do not know if there are anything left much more to be sold. I think I did indicate to Mr. Joseph while he was in government and I was in opposition that maybe one of the things that they should do with Grenlec before the call election was to diversify the company to the Grenadian people. Now, I was a young student then of the politics in 1994, and I would remind this administration again, it was the sale of Grenlec in 1994 that ushered in Dr. Mitchell and the new National Party in 1995. I do believe if the government was to go down that road again in terms of the liquidating it, and maybe there might be maybe there might be any problems, but again, the terms and conditions under which it was done, and to go back to that, we must remember our history. And the funny thing about it, history has a way of repeating itself. And to do so, I would say, Dr. Bob, again, it would be the beginning of the end for this NDC administration.
Okay, let us now get Mr. Philip. I'll give you a chance for a quick rebuttal before we come up for air, and then we'll get to those major pillars. Yes, Mr. Philip, go ahead.
Let's be clear about that 1994-1995 deal. Philosophically, none of the governments since the revolution has had a problem with privatizing aspects of the state. Even in this current budget by Deacon Mitchell, it is absolutely clear that the government is of the view that if something can be done by the private sector, that the state should not get involved. Now, while I am fundamentally opposed to that, because I've stated before, I function as a state capitalist. If something can make profit for the state, I am not going to hand it over to Comrade Ali and those folk in the private sector. What we have failed to do in the state is to ensure that where things can be a profitable operation, politicians have interfered, right? And we have muddied the waters. We have seen it in the same Grenlec. We have seen it in Grenlec, especially over the past year. You've seen it in Gravel and Concrete Corporation, and I could name a number of others. It is not that these things can be made can operate at a profitable level. It is because of the extent of political interference. And if we were to put a price on that, if we were to put a price on political interference, you will find that these enterprises are way above the profit line. But that is my personal view.
Absolutely. Now, let us, we are going to come up for air. Gentlemen, thank you again for staying with us. This is a very intellectually stimulating discussion. I love budgets. I love listening to debates, both the rhetoric and the substance of the debate, of course. But we are going to come up for air because, you know, there is a particular methodology. As a methodologist, there is a particular methodology of getting to the objectives that the government set forth in the budget, which we're going to talk about. Those 6 major pillars. We'll talk about the methodology of being able to accomplish what is set out. So viewers and listeners, please stand by. We will be right back after this quick break. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are?
To the cards that I have drawn that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. The unions are not threatening to withdraw their labor, and neither are they threatening to shut the country down, as you did.
I think your summarization of my position is highly inaccurate, and may I dare say a bit inflammatory.
The strategy did not work the last time for you. So what would make this?
Well, you're assuming that we're doing the same strategy.
very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. The Honorable Jumani Williams, we call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Mr. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
You're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the public...
But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are? And welcome back, viewers and listeners. And now we are going to segue into our conversation on some of the major pillars that animated the budget speech, and of course animated also what is stated in the estimates of revenue and expenditure. In defining these pillars, the Prime Minister spoke about the strategic areas of health and wellness, education and training, agriculture and the marine industry, the physical and digital infrastructure, as culture and the creative sector, and energy transition and the environment. Mr. Clement, I would want to begin with you in terms of understanding how do you feel that these particular pillars define what an NDC administration would look like in government?
Well, again, I listened to the budget carefully, and listening to the statements as was presented by the Prime Minister in terms of the pillars that are presented, I look at them and I would address a couple of issues here in that he looked at Grenada, and yes, I do believe maybe Grenada could have been a lot further on to where it is. In every government, there is something that you could have done better. But as to almost give Grenada a failing grade from 1983 to now, in my mind, I think it reflects just poorly on what exactly that you're looking at. Because I look at myself, I look at the Prime Minister, I look at Grenadians in general, and I am thinking, aren't we a product of the state? Probably what he was looking at is just maybe physical development, but in terms of your country, you have to marry physical development and your human resource development. And I do believe the statistics will show in the Caribbean that in terms of our human resource development in the OECS and in the Caribbean, Grenada is second to none, of which the Prime Minister himself is a product of Grenada. Myself, those of us who come from that era of the 70s, 80s, 90s in terms of development. And when I look at today, professional Grenadians that we have turned out from now go back right up to the 80s, I think more justice could be given to our nation. I'm not talking about NNP government, but I'm talking about all the governments of the past, NNP, NDC, who probably over the years have invested heavily in our human resource development. I am particularly interested in agriculture, and the Prime Minister went on to say on many occasions that promises made, promises kept. But something that was loudly absent from the agricultural estimate, I did not hear it in his budget statement. I did not see it in the budget document. That I think one of the promises that was made was the decriminalization and legalization of cannabis, marijuana. And I did not hear anything about it. And so is that a promise made and not kept? Is it going to be looked at in the coming year? No. But a lot of things that was said, I mean, in the budget presentation, again, like I say, I'm looking forward for the implementation. And if it is true that he can get 50%, 75%, 95%, I would not say 100% implementation, then we would maybe have a different trajectory. But again, how is it loudly that, and a few people call me about it because they remember a few years ago I raised the issue and it was a non-starter. But over the years, it has been forefront, and it is missing from this year's budget presentation. That is the discussion in Grenada about cannabis.
Right, let us bring in Mr. Joseph here. Mr. Joseph, same question on these 6 pillars. Let us hear your thoughts on that. Of course, your MPs in Parliament, the NNP legislators in Parliament, they offered credit, to their credit, on areas of the budget that they liked, and they offered criticism on areas of the budget that they didn't like. So let us hear your thoughts with respect to those 6 foundational pillars, especially health, because that has been a perennial issue and continues to be a perennial issue. I would say that it's a thorn in the side of Grenada's development if you think about it. So over to you, Mr. Joseph.
I think it's a good thing to have priority, put for your focus. I recall during the revolution, you will have the year of agro-industry or the year of that, so the focus shifts to that particular area. And therefore, it's all right to have these priority areas. The thing is the plan to implement these things. Now, I have not heard anything about public sector reform. You see, you're still relying on the traditional public service that all governments in the past attempted to make changes to in order to improve the efficiency. We must deal with the efficiency of the public service in order for the government to achieve its objectives. It's not the ministers that are going to achieve objectives. The people who are paid to implement it. And we have a very large public service. So the question is, with that large public service, why is it that over the years, you still have a very slow rate of implementation of government's plan and policies? So the best plan and policies would be announced. But I am looking forward to see the achievement at the end of the year, when the review comes on the next budget, to hear what was the implementation rate, how much have you achieved. Putting emphasis in health, every government says that, because health is critical.
Well, except every government says that, Mr. Joseph, and yes, you may say that every government says that, but it is a perennial issue that transcends governments.
Yes.
People go to the hospital, Mr. Joseph, with respect, and there is a fair look. Recently, somebody I consider my mother and my aunt went to the hospital for what was to be a minor surgery, and she ended up dying there. I think health is such a critical aspect of development,
yes,
right?
But
So,
I'm not saying it's
but
not.
please proceed. Yes.
No, I'm not saying it's not.
Okay.
I'm saying every government attempt to respond to the concerns of its citizens. And one of the biggest concerns is health. So you hear every government putting health. I'm saying, what concrete measures have been announced in this budget so that we can see a change? I've heard about building a new hospital, but building the new hospital in 2025. And then the funds that are planned to use to build the hospital is the National Transformation Fund. To build it in 2025, closer to the next election, you will build a new hospital. Is the issue a new hospital, or is it the current conditions that we have in the present hospital and getting workers motivated so that they can perform well, because we need to improve on the services that are provided at the general hospital. And health care, number one, no issue there. I am saying that the public service that is dependent on to bring these benefits and the implementation and for budget execution, that is where my concerns lie. And I've not had nothing about, I've heard about pension reform. And before we end, I'll come back to the issue of pension. I've heard about pension reform, but not public sector reform. So we need.
So you think there should be a marriage with the two, public sector reform? Yes, Mr. Joseph, let us give Mr. Philip, please, one at a time, please. Mr. Philip, go ahead. Yes.
Let me correct Oliver in that regard. On page 40 of the budget presentation, section 9.1, you talk about transforming the public service and pension reform. And within that particular area, there is the whole question of regularizing temporary workers and all the rest of it. Again, an additional burden on the finances of the state that I don't know how it will be paid for. But the matter is addressed there, Oliver, where there are 4 points there: transitioning of money, regularizing workers on various forms of contract, addressing the question of confirmation of employees who have been there for years, and so on. And regularizing workers with a view to making them permanent.
That is not the transformation I'm talking about. That is not the transformation I'm talking about. That will bring about changes in a public service where you appoint people for life.
In an overall context, the question of implementation of policies by both your administration, Oliver, and by the current administration has been and will continue to be a problem. As a matter of fact, I seem to recall that the first ever appointed Minister of Implementation was Whiteman of St. David's.
Justin Whiteman from St. David's.
Justin Whiteman on an NNP ticket. And the question of implementation has plagued governments. This budget also addresses the matter of implementation in respect of the public sector investment program, where it is pointed out that even though external funding, whether it is from CDB, World Bank, or other sources, have been identified, the question of implementation has been piss poor, to say the least. That's the objective reality. However, let me take you back in terms of the implementation of the new administration's manifesto and agenda. I think it is summarized on page 18, where the question, on page 8, not 18, page 8, where a couple aspects of the transformation agenda has been highlighted. One is the question of healthcare. Two is the question of what the NDC sees as respect. And the question of respect is targeted at three segments: the question of youth, the question of the workforce, and the question of the retirees. And you have seen the action with respect to payment of deducted salaries, regardless as to whether your position on it, whatever your position on it is. You've seen the action with respect to payment to past pensions, whether or not you thought that the matter should have been appealed and saved the state some money. That is not relevant at this point in time. But it is, as the Prime Minister said, it is a promise that was made and a promise that had been fulfilled. In addition to which, in terms of implementing the policies, we need to look at a couple of other things. The proposal for a creative economy, I think that is innovative. It is new. It is not that the creative economy was not supported before, but I believe that the emphasis suggested to it in this budget augurs well, and we have to wait to see what the outcome is.
Well, except the Prime Minister said zero was spent on the creative economy. I mean, it might be a matter of semantics, right?
I said there was money spent there before, although it was not called that, because there have been previous cultural festivals, film festivals, and all the rest
Festival of the Arts, that's under the creative economy. Choral speaking, that's under the creative economy.
When Brenda Hood was Minister of Culture, there was a tremendous amount of support given to supporting jazz festivals and stuff like that. So it is not a question of zero. It was not a clear-cut identified area of activity. I was talking about bold steps. The question of the adjustment to the NIS retirement age and the contribution to the NIS, a matter that Oliver and company dragged their foot on for 4 or 5 actuarial reviews. My only concern in this regard is whether the 0.5% increase, which is targeted every year until whenever, whether it is enough to ensure that the NIS has viability. Because my calculation of the 0.5% increase translates into just under $500,000, just under $5 million a year increase in the fund. I think the fund at this point in time stands somewhere around 8.5 to $900 million. And I don't know if the 0.5% or the 1% changes every year until whenever it is going to be enough to ensure the sustainability. But however,
except Mr. Philip,
done.
Yeah, but except Mr. Philip, the administration also articulated the view that this will be a phased approach, that increase there, that rate increase, coupled with an increase in the retirement age. So do you believe that over time they still would be able to meet that target of not wanting the NIS to
given the level of the rate increase, I am not sure if it is enough to do what to ensure its sustainability. But I say it has been a bold move because Oliver and company dragged their foot on that for 4 or 5 actuarial reviews. That's the objective reality.
And I think we need to give Mr. Joseph, quickly, I'll give Mr. Joseph, I'll give you the chance to respond, but I want Mr. Philip to finish his articulation there on those points. Please continue to pontificate.
I like the proposal regarding health insurance and unemployment insurance. The question is, how are we going to fund it? I think it is going to be problematic because within 3 or 4 years, your NIS is going to reach 16 or so percent. I can't see a national health insurance provision coming in for less than 2%. And I can't see an unemployment insurance coming in for less than a 2.5 to 3%. So you're talking about probably eventually up to 20% of people's gross pay being taken away by these kinds of provisions. I honestly would like to see how this pans out over the next year or two, or for the remaining time that this administration has before the next elections. One other thing there that I believe is likely to be, 2 other things that are likely to be transformative is the question of digitizing what is called the digitizing transformation. If you look at pages 33 and 34 of the budget, and the point had been made by the Prime Minister that Grenada has had the lead within the CARICOM area for ICT over the years, but it seems to be debatable exactly how much has been accomplished in this regard. I also find, however, that the government's proposed reduction in the use of paper and so on, I find it to be quite ambitious. Generally, one finds that as you computerize and digitize more, that in fact you could end up using more paper. So I believe that they're probably over optimistic in that regard. And then there is the suggestion of a transformative project linking linking St. Patrick's to St. George. But the nature of it is not indicated. We don't know if it is roadworks. We don't know if it is marine works. Are we talking about a fast ferry? Are we talking about an improved road network? In fact, the question of removing the Eastern Main Road and relocating it further inland has been something which has been on the cards since the days of the PRG. Everybody seemed to be afraid to undertake it. Or are we talking of a cable system using cable cars and all those things with between points to bring people from St. Patrick's to town? I think that the actual nature of that needs to be disclosed because that has a truly transformative character, and maybe the government should come clean or disclose exactly what it has in mind in that regard. I think that I could probably the other stuff, the solarization, so to speak, of Karakou, a step in the right direction, where the intention is to install, I think it is 800 kVA, and to substitute solar for 60% of the diesel consumption in Karakou. I think that Karakou, in fact, and Petit Martinique can serve as pilots in respect of sustainable approaches to providing energy. That would be my comments on some of the highlights of the transformative approach that is formed within this budget.
Absolutely. Mr. Joseph, is there anything else you wish to add to what Mr. Phillip said? I believe Mr. Phillip presented what I call a good analysis of the budget in terms of what worked, what would not work, what were some of the deficiencies in his view, what can be accomplished. And Mr. Joseph, over to you.
Except that he conveniently forgets when the NNP increased the pension, the contribution of the NI scheme. He said we drug with it and did absolutely nothing. But he knows that. He just conveniently forget it. The second point is for the increase in the age, that was a decision already taken by the cabinet to implement the go to 61 in the year 2021. But what we were dealing with, COVID, that was affecting the entire population. And the national health insurance, all the studies have been done to start implementation. And the good thing is this government is using the same consulting firm because they had brought it right to the stage of implementation. Then it comes the question of the cost. Should you in 2022, in addition to increasing the NIS contribution, then ask the workers to pay an additional amount now for national health insurance? That could lead to a reduction in disposable income, because if you have to pay an additional 4-5% on one hand, then you have to pay for the increase. You see, when you outside of cabinet like Mr. Phillip, you could come up with all the brilliant ideas, because you do not have to take into consideration in your thought how it will affect the poor and the working class. All you are seeing is the best thing for Grenada is to establish national health insurance and charge 10%. But it is not a simple matter like that when the cabinet is making policy consideration. So from the outside, you would say, well, why is the government moving so slow? Why they don't do this? So no, there are a lot of variables at play and a lot of studies that have to be done. And you must obtain proper advice on how to move forward before you reach to the stage of implementation. So that's why the government has decided to go to move 0.5 and 0.5, 1%. Mr. Phillip may figure that is a joke, or it could be 1%. But the government must take all other variables into consideration. So I'm saying to him, when you're on the outside, looking in, he said, Bob, you could come on your program and put out everything about why the government didn't do this. But when you're in the inside, it's a different ball game. So it has moved by 1%. I think that was the correct adjustment at this time.
So you agree, you support the government's decision to...
Mr. Joseph, I absolutely agree with you. But it took 4 or 5 actuarial reviews for you to move the NIS rate by 1%, and you were glad to have suspended it for COVID and eventually bring it back at the beginning of last year. It took you 4 or 5 reviews to make that move. These moves should have been made years ago. So don't come down the road at all.
But there were 5 other reviews that were done between 2008 and 2012. You never mentioned none. There were 5 reviews that were done between 2008 and 2012. And nothing was done, but that is okay for you.
But who was it? Right? Who were the administrations in that time and before?
No, I'm talking about that period. So, anyway, I'm saying...
yes, one at a time, please. One at a time, please. Mr. Philip.
NNP has been the ruling administration for 20 of the last 25 years. The ball is in your court. You dragged your feet on it. So chill out.
But we did increase it, which you conveniently forgot. So, and I expect you to conveniently forget that. So let's go back to the budget. Right?
Yes.
Yes. Let's go back because
please let's segue. Yes. Please.
Yes. Right. So I'm saying that in terms of the measures that are announced, the real test will be in its implementation. I agree with the age increase. I think that the national health insurance for 2025 is too much a long way off. I thought because, as I said, all the work has been completed. Just at the step of implementation, and you have COVID. I thought the national health insurance, in order to deal with the health issue that we mentioned, could have been implemented before 2025, but the government has announced that it will implement it in 2025. Again, they are looking at the figures and the report and the study that was done, and it make it that call for 2025. So the measures, any measure that will push Grenada forward is welcomed, because we want to live in a Grenada that will make it advances. And let us see at the end of the first year the account of achievement and implementation rate, and then I will be able to make a judgment on the performance of the government.
All right, now, Mr. Joseph, yes, please. And then we have to take our final break before we have you come back for wrap-up comments. But please finish that.
But before the wrap-up comment, let me just on the budget, as I said, just one point on the budget implementation.
Yes.
And a matter that everybody looking at the pension only one way, that the pension commitment was made and it was paid out. What's about the recurrent costs that you have to meet every month? You have 2,200 pensioners on roll at the moment. 525 more will be added. And in the worst case scenario, there are 2,000 public servants that are qualified because of the length of service, that is 26 2/3, that could opt to leave. And nobody's talking about that. In the worst case scenario, 2,000 public servants could opt to leave the public service, not based on age, based on the fact that they made 26 2/3 years. And what I have heard from some of my friends in the public service, they may not wait for public sector reform, for pension reform, because they're not sure what will come out of it, yes. And that they may opt to go, and that could have a real run on the budget. That's a real threat, you know. So I wanted to point out that side of the pension thing, because only one side we're looking at it at. But my concern is the effect that could have on the budget implementation if just half, say 1,000 then, because a little over 2,000 is qualified, just half, 1,000 decided to go in 2023. You know what that could do? That could derail the whole budget process. And I think that is something that I think have not been given enough consideration. And that is something I think the administration will need to pay attention to.
Absolutely. On that note, Mr. Philip, is there anything else you wanted to piggyback on?
Let me share Oliver's concern in respect of this pension matter. And in particular, I want to reference page 41 of the presentation, and I quote from it. In this regard, we have established a 5-member committee chaired by economist Dr. Colin Gilchrist and comprising key stakeholders with a mandate to devise a new pension regime for all employees who will join the public service after January 2024. Maybe the question for Oliver, first of all, On the basis of the existing legislation, pension for public officers is entrenched in the Constitution practically. Maybe we should invite Oliver's response as to whether or not the NNP will join the existing administration in trying to change this constitutional requirement, because I don't see how else we are going to be able to get out of it.
Mr. Joseph, your thoughts on that? An all hands on deck approach to pensions reform, which to your administration's credit, you did call for the same type of pension reform. Obviously, there were some trust issues, shall we say, especially with the labor movement. But let's get your thoughts on that all hands on deck approach that Mr. Philippa has articulated.
Very, very simple. There is a pension reform committee that has been established, where the trade union have been invited. I want Mr. Philip to point out in the document where NNP or any opposition party was invited to sit, and he will find the answer there.
Okay. And that's
but Oliver, the trade union movement is not required to effect or promote constitutional change. Constitutional change is a matter of parliament. You have 6 members of the parliament at this point in time. If there was a move to go by way of a 2/3 majority or to promote a referendum, what would be the party's position in that regard? Because
we don't know. We haven't got
a milestone around the next.
We have not got to that stage yet. When we get to that stage, we will address the matter.
Hedging, Oliver. You're hedging.
I say when we get to that stage, we will address it. The NNP has not been invited to send a representative to sit on the pension reform committee.
All right, you're not invited because it's a private party, the NDC have, and I hear you.
Well, I think he's referring to the actual pension reform committee as or the proposed pension reform committee that will be constituted to be chaired by Dr. Cullen Gilchrist. Is that what I'm hearing?
That is what I'm referring to.
Okay.
That is what I'm referring to.
But I think what Mr. Philip is saying is that if, in fact, pension reform comes up as a legislative prescription in Parliament, that by default, the 6 MPs who represent the new National Party would obviously have to have a position on it when it does come up.
And we will have a position in it when it comes up.
Okay.
We will have a position, yes.
Okay, absolutely. Viewers and listeners, there were lots of comments in the chat, but a lot of the comments, regrettably, were not necessarily related to the substance of the discussion we were having here. But we do have a comment here from Mr. King Lewis, who said, "For me, it's easy. Let us start with reckless." And I think he's really speaking to how we fund the budget. Let us start with the reckless public and private motor vehicle drivers. We can start to issue tickets and fines to them. And the dumping of garbage as well all over the country, issuing tickets and fines there. Perhaps we need a lot of speed cameras in Grenada, given the rates of accidents that we are seeing there. But that is one suggestion that came up. And then we had another viewer who was asking Mr. Joseph to articulate any aspect of the budget that he felt was positive. Mr. Joseph, I believe that came from Dr. Tessa Barry. So let us hear, Mr. Joseph, positive aspects of the 2023 budget.
Well, you seem to suggest all I said was negative. And I
Right.
don't know
Well, not me. I'm just saying what the viewer said.
Yes,
It's not me. Don't put words in my mouth. I don't do that.
Well, the person you say that's saying no rational person in listening to my comment today could say that I did not think that there was any positive in the budget. When I said that the 6 priority areas are in themselves very good, but it's the implementation that I am concerned about.
It's where the rubber meets the road, or as Mr. Clement says, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right, Mr. Clement? That's what you say?
I would continue to say that, Dr. Bubb, but I think I was left out of the conversation in terms of just prior conversation there that I wanted to get my 2 cents in.
Yes, please do. I do not want to be like the previous speaker and not give you the opportunity to speak. I don't want you to chain yourself. Go ahead.
Yes, in terms of the implementation when it comes to the NIS or when it comes to some of the plans and programs of national health care system. My question is, yes, in principle they're good. How are they going to be paid for? As Mr. Ambrose rightly said, is it going to be out of government coffers, or is it going to be part of the wages from public workers? But my question is, while you may look to garnish the wages to pay for these programs, which will be beneficial to the public in general, I have not seen anything that speaks to the increase in wages for our public sector workers in terms of because you give us on the right hand, you take it back on the left hand, and that is something that has not kept up with inflation. That when we look at the price of living now and the cost of living, nobody can doubt that there probably might be a 5-10%, or in some cases 15-20% increase in cost of living. Those do not even mention the construction industry. The question is, are wages keeping up with the demand of our citizen for better services? It's a question that must be answered.
Absolutely. Those are very important questions. And of course, again, as I said, this is a conversation that has to be ongoing. There are also methods by which we analyze the implementation of the budget. There is the medium-term report, Mr. Clement, correct? And you also have mechanisms in Parliament by which we can monitor and process, evaluate the implementation of the budget. Implementation is a concern that the administration has raised as well, rates of implementation, ensuring that that can, in fact, be properly articulated. So what we want to do, folks, is to take a final break of the program, and we will invite the panelists to come back for some closing comments. And welcome back, viewers and listeners. And at this point, we want to close the program with some closing comments from our erudite panel, or very knowledgeable panel here this morning. Mr. Clement, over to you. Sorry, you said we we sort of forgot you in the imbroglio between Mr. Philip and Joseph there. But let's get you for some closing comments. But before we do, Mr. Clement, I have a question concerning the leader of the opposition, and I intimated it in the opening editorial of the program, and that has to do with the non-availability of the hard copy of the estimates of revenue and expenditure. The former Prime Minister, now leader of the opposition, was really perturbed by the fact that he did not receive the document in a timely fashion. But I said that you would have a lot to say about that. Isn't that irony rich there, Mr. Clement?
Well, it is rich, but I will not subscribe to it, because I want that maybe they should not be treated as the way I was treated. Two things came from it: maybe the timely presentation, and also the electronic copy of the document. I mean, I think the document probably is 500-600 pages, and imagine you're sent a document electronically, 500-600 pages to review on a computer screen. You could only take just short pieces at a time. And I said in last year's budget that I remember that the United States budget is thousands of pages long, and you would see them wielding the hard copy on a cat. And here, last year, you refused to give an a hard copy. But there is something about the hard copy that, I had to go take night and make day to print it so that you could handle it in such a way that it is reviewable. And maybe there might be something in the regulation in the law that states that, especially when it comes to budget presentation, at least a hard copy of the estimate should be made available. While it is true that we want to go down or total electronic, I do not see it. I do not see it that way. But I would let that rest, because I also remember from an old friend of mine says, what goes around comes around. And probably you are right there, Dr. Bob. What goes around comes around. But
The old friend of yours, you mean the late great Herbert Blaze of character from Peter
That's
Marquis,
right.
one of your
What
predecessors.
goes around,
Yes.
right. What goes around comes around. But I would not subscribe to effecting it, especially when it comes to politics and Grenada and changes that must be made. But I would close
closing comments, yes,
with all the budget presentation, and whether it is on the opposition or on the Minister of Finance, Prime Minister side, with the word. I think I remember the word came to the prophet Jeremiah. The children of Israel were taken captive in Babylon, and they sent to Jeremiah and asked him to the prophet, how should they behave in Babylon? And Jeremiah answered and said unto them that they should pray for the city, because if it is well with Babylon, it will be well with them. I do believe that we should consider the government as it is and pray for them, wish them well, so that if it is well with Grenada, then it will be well with all of us. And I'm praying for the success of our country. Thank you,
Mr.
and God
Joseph,
bless.
yes, thank you so much again, Mr. Clement. Some said that you were in hibernation or hiding in following the last elections, but I'm glad that you did answer the phone when we called, and you offered to appear on the program today. So thank you again for always being available and present for us when you can.
You're most welcome.
Absolutely. Mr. Oliver Joseph, a former Minister of Trade Specialist, over to you for some closing comments.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think it was a very useful program. Let me say my overall analysis of the budget is that the real GDP growth that is projected at 3.6% in 2023 would not achieve the desired outcome of the budget. To do that, we need a growth rate of about 6%. But the projection is 3.6% for the economy to grow by. And I think for all this ambitious program that's set out there, you need to achieve a 6% growth rate in order to achieve it. That's my first point. The second point is the budget. It seems to me that the poor and the working class do not stand to benefit much from the measures in the budget. I disagree with the VAT on sugar, because first thing my doctor said to me, sugar by itself do not lead to diabetes. Not sugar on its own. Every household in Grenada has sugar. Sugar is one of the most widely consumed commodity. What you have to do if you want to address the incidence of diabetes, there are a lot of other areas that you could tackle instead of putting 15% on sugar. 15% on sugar. It will directly affect the poor and vulnerable. As I said, that is what the poor household depend on, and that is not an area that you should tax, especially when you're trying to achieve the outcome of having people drink less, use less sugar. There's a principle in economics called tax incidence. The tax incidence must be certain. In other words, if you introduce a tax, you must be very certain on who will bear the cost of that tax. And from that principle, the people who will bear the tax incidence will hurt most are the poor and the vulnerable, and therefore the government should reconsider the VAT of 15. You could have put a VAT of 5, but you have to be 15. And
so you do not oppose the imposition of the VAT. You you oppose the rate.
Absolutely. They increase the rate of 15%, and they could look at different rates and different ways of controlling sugar. I don't think controlling diabetes, you will control it by putting a 15% VAT on it. There are a lot of sugary snacks and other things are coming in with high content sugar. It's written on the label. You could say, well, if it exceeds this amount on the label, then you charge an extra tax on it, but not to just take 15% VAT and put it directly on sugar. I am totally opposed to that, and I don't think it is the proper thing to do. And that is my own personal view. In fact, the leader of the opposition did talk about that as well, and that the government should reconsider that imposition of the tax of 15% on sugar, because the effect it will have on the poor and vulnerable in our society.
Mm-hmm. And Mr. Philip, over to you. Over to you. Thank you again for providing a measured, balanced, objective, and critical analysis of the budget. I believe all of you gentlemen attempted to do that. Of course, some in the audience may disagree with whatever positions taken by either of the panelists here, but at the end of the day, the Bubb Report is a platform where all views, irrespective of your politics, is encouraged, and it is a practice that we engage in every week. So over to you, Mr. Philip.
All right, so thank you very much, Dr. Bubb. I regret that I must disagree with my friend Oliver regarding the sugary tax. Oliver probably has lost sight of the level of obesity that we have among the population, particularly women. And increasingly these days, children go to the schools, walk the streets, and you will see the level of obesity that exists within the society. I believe that the tax on sugar is a step in the right direction. It is certainly an indication from this administration as to what it wishes is a step in the right direction. I do agree that probably there could be a consideration to distinguishing between white sugar and brown sugar, but that is for the experts to do. I don't know what proportion of the total sugars one is brown and what is whiter. I disagree that the budget has targeted the poor and the vulnerable. As a matter of fact, I am surprised at the level of congruency between this budget and that of the previous administration when it comes to programs of the poor and vulnerable. Objectively, the Imani program has been continued, although in spite of announced measures to modernize, revitalize, modify this program. I do agree with the current administration that it is impracticable for people to be training for n number of years without anything in sight. I think that this is a step in direction, but I am not aware that there has been mass layoffs of Imanis and stuff like that. The seed program has continued. The post-COVID, stimulation packages have continued. In fact, in a number of respects, a lot of programs of the former administration has been continued, which in fact demonstrates the extent of poverty that we have in the country. This particular budget did not indicate what the poverty level was, but I think that the Boeing budget of last year did indicate a poverty level. I can't pick it up offhand right now, but the current budget does recognize that there is a high level of poverty in the country, and I believe it has continued to address it. The matter of unemployment has also been raised, and objectively, we are not going to find people being able to build a future, find a people when we have unemployment in excess of 25%. I also agree with Oliver that the projected 3.6 growth for the new year is probably inadequate to fulfill some of the plans of the government. But I do not know to what extent a growth rate in excess of 6% is realistic. particularly when we are looking at increasing inflationary pressures. We don't see an end in sight to the war in Russia and Ukraine. So these impact on the overall macroeconomic situation. And I take the view of Clement that we do have to wish the government and country well in the interests of all of us. Elon, I thank you, and I thank your listenership, viewership for having tolerated us this morning. Thank you.
Absolutely. Some viewers they thought that we had a wrong choice of panelists. I don't know what they think this program is, because we really work hard every week to bring diverse perspectives to this platform. I'm not going to get out of control, but it's an extremely frustrating reaction I get when I know that we work extremely hard to bring a particular balance to the Bubb Report, to bring informed people from all sides. If you do not agree with the viewers that we bring on this program, you can certainly say that, but to say that we are bringing people here because they do not conform to your particular worldview, I think is extremely problematic. We will continue to fearlessly press on and ensure that we bring diverse and balanced perspectives to this program, and that is not going to change. So I just thought I would say that as a wrap-up. Gentlemen, thank you again for appearing on the program this week, and have a happy Christmas, have a happy holidays to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, viewers and listeners, again, on behalf of the hardworking producers of the Bubb Report, I are going to conclude this week's airings of the Bubb Report with a special parang segment on the next episode of the Bubb Report, which is next week, Sunday. Again, I thank you. I'm your host, Dr. Kellen Bubb, wishing everyone a pleasant week. Bye-bye.